Welcome to an Inside Carolina Next Level. I'm your host, Tommy Ashley. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt, and of course, that is Greg Barnes. This is an Ask Greg show. Before I get into it, I got to talk about Big Game USA, the official football of the North Carolina Tar Heels. You see it behind me there on the shelf. Greg gets to watch the video that I'm going to play you for Big Game.
You think you know North Carolina? It's not just the Smoky Mountains and the Old Well. This is Kenan Stadium, where the Jordan Fly Elite game ball makes its debut and its homecoming. Born to fly, built for Carolina, snag your Carolina blue today.
You can snag it at Big Game USA. Check out the link attached to this YouTube video or in the description or on Inside Carolina message boards. You can get this ball right here in your hands. It's the same ball that North Carolina Tar Heels will be playing with this fall in Kenan Stadium and elsewhere. And I got to admit, it's pretty sweet football. And it's got the Jordan logo, Jordan Fly Elite at Big Game USA. I'll hold it in my hand while we talk. Greg, we're going to talk of course, I submitted, just so folks that are watching this or listening, I submitted or I put on the board message boards, Tar Pit Premium and Inside Carolina or the UNC Basketball Premium, questions request for you. And we do these next levels, and we usually dig in a little deeper to the normal everyday post game or game coverage. But Greg, I'll be honest, you've seen the list of questions, and I've tried to cull the herd a little bit. But I was impressed, man. I was really impressed of the questions that people asked.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it speaks to the changing landscape that North Carolina is currently enduring. Some of it has already changed quite a bit over the last 4 years. Certainly more to come with rev share, however that looks in the next couple months. And then when you add in the fact that Bill Belichick is in Chapel Hill, a lot of changes on the football side of things, and then the basketball program is having one of its most difficult 5-6 year stretches that it's ever had. So a lot of concern, a lot of changes, and therefore a lot of questions.
A lot of questions. We're going to get right into it. And what I'm going to do is Greg and I are going to do this show, and then after the show, we're going to figure out who had the best question, and I'll hit you up on the message boards and try to get you some Johnny T-shirt swag. So it is a relevant discussion, and you got to pay attention because some of the questions are long, and I'm not going to scroll them all on the screen, but we're going to talk about them. Let's get into it. Greg Barnes, first question for you. He who wears Carolina blue from the message board, how will the House settlement level the playing field in college athletics? We've seen the money that players are making explode, and the haves have a lot and the have-nots are struggling quite a bit. But Greg, just in general, how will this House settlement sort of level it for everybody?
Well, I think the way for people to understand this is that when NIL first came in back in 2021, the idea was that you would have these small contracts with maybe a car dealership or maybe with a restaurant, and you exchange some marketing, you're the face of that restaurant, you're the face of that car dealership, you get a check on the side, everybody's happy. And because there's really no guardrails in place by the NCAA, surprise, surprise, it has really shifted into you have these collectives, and now even the universities themselves can play a role in that, where money just kind of comes in from boosters, and then you can kind of pay out players and say, hey, it's attached to this NIL program, and you're going to make all this money. And what the House settlement is hoping to do is you have all these various lawsuits that have taken place, and the House settlement brings together a number of them. And there's really kind of four components of the House settlement. And I think this is important for people to understand. And we'll lay this out in greater detail next week as the approval hearing is set for Monday, April 7th. But number one, you have to go back to the Ed O'Bannon case, right? Where video games were benefiting off players. Players were not able to receive money from some of that. A lot of that goes through the court system. And so what the first and primary part of the House settlement is this $2.8 billion payment that goes to student athletes dating back to 2016. That's a lot of money. And a lot of that's going to be coming out of NCAA payments to its member institutions. And of course, the NCAA makes the majority of its money through the NCAA tournament that everybody is enjoying right now, although I guess Carolina fans are not. Then you also have a rev share model, which is where things kind of get interesting. And what the rev share model is for the first time in the history of the NCAA and of college athletics, universities themselves are able to share revenue with their student athletes directly. Never happened before. And what that number is right now, it's like 25% of the average revenue of some of these major power conference teams. But for 25, 26, the number we're looking at is $20.5 million. And schools that opt in, which anybody wanting to be competitive is going to opt in, North Carolina has, you can spend up to that $28.5 million across the student athletes in your athletic department. If you want to spend $20 million on your rowing team, you can do that. Now, of course, teams aren't going to be doing that. The majority of that money is going to be going to the football programs by and large, but everybody has a choice, and you can make that determination. Bubba Cunningham will get to make that determination of where UNC's money goes. So that's a kind of a ceiling, that $20.5 million that adheres across all of Division I. So whether it's Alabama, whether it's Ohio State, whether it's Duke, everybody can only spend that much directly from the university coffers. And that's important. Two other parts of it that come into play, though, is kind of a restructuring of the roster sizes and scholarship allotments. That's kind of secondary to what we're talking about right now. But then, of course, the other part is NCAA bylaws coming into play with NIL. So you have rev share, which is your $20.5 million. You also have commercial NIL. And that's where things have kind of gotten out of control of late. And so the idea with the commercial NIL section of this is that it's going to have a third-party clearinghouse. I think Deloitte's supposed to be the one kind of checking these deals. But it's just to get away from the idea that, hey, we got a third-string center who's not contributing and who's not really a big name, but he's getting $2 million. It's really to remove those types of situations where kids are just being bid for, because that's not permitted with NIL. Now, what you will see is that kids that are big names that have national deals, well, they're still going to be able to get their fair market value. So Cooper Flagg, for example, is still going to be able to make a lot of money with Gatorade and New Balance. But it's going to be the kids maybe who aren't as well known, who maybe don't have that market value. Those are the ones this is really going to be set up to prevent from some of the spending getting out of control. And so those are the primary components of this rev share situation that's coming in and the House settlement. And in terms of leveling the playing field, when we start talking about that ceiling cap, that $20.5 million for rev share, that's where you're starting to talk about, hey, kids are starting to get paid. They can be paid by the university, and everybody has the same amount to spend. What we don't know is how effective that NIL third-party clearinghouse is going to be. Are they going to be able to rein in some of this out-of-control spending that's just going to kids because some schools have more money than others? We'll have to wait and see exactly how well that plays out. It sounds good, but a lot of things that we've heard regarding amateur athletics the last couple of years have sounded good and just have not turned out the way we thought they might.
Yeah, it's crazy how it's going, but yeah, it is at least on its face an attempt to quote unquote level the playing field. Like Greg said, we'll see how it works out. A ton of questions on this very topic. I'm gonna get to a couple more. TCP23 UNC asks, how will UNC divvy up the money? You mentioned, Greg, that it's a Bubba Cunningham decision. I would assume he would consult with others, but how do you see Carolina doing it, or what's the expectation there?
So the back payment deal, which is the $2.8 billion, the way that's structured is that football, because of the number of student athletes and because part of the money involved, about 75% of the money kind of goes towards the football side of things. And then about 15 to 20% goes to men's basketball. And then the rest is to the other programs. And I think that's kind of the model that a lot of of the power conference teams are going to be looking at moving forward. There's been some speculation that both the SEC and the Big Ten are going to have pretty strict requirements in terms of what their programs spend on football. So let's say maybe 75% of that rev share would go to football. But as I mentioned, schools can make whatever determination they want. And so while I do think North Carolina is going to lean towards spending the bulk of the money on football, like the SEC and the Big Ten, we don't exactly know how Bubba wants to do that. What we can say is that if you look at Bill Belichick's contract, there's $13 million in rev share written in ink. So we know that football is going to get at least $13 million starting next year, which leaves $7.5 million for the rest of the programs. And everything that we've heard is that the men's basketball program will get the majority of that $7.5 million.
It is something to watch, but as Greg lays out, there's some of it that's in ink. So that'll definitely happen. Smoke Pants off the message boards, and of course a longtime subscriber and contributor on the message boards. How is UNC positioned? Are they catching up? Are they ahead of the game? Football, basketball going to be better off? What do you think, Greg?
It's a great question, and I think the fact that Bubba Cunningham has decided to be full rev share is important. The SEC and the Big Ten, there's reports that they are requiring all their programs to be full rev share, which makes sense given the amount of money that they're bringing in with their media deals. That's not the same for some other conferences, including the ACC. There hasn't been a lot of conversation within the ACC ranks that we've heard regarding what's going to be required. And so there is the potential for the ACC to have some teams that are not full rev share. So North Carolina is going to be paying $20.5 million to its student athletes. There may be a handful of schools that are only paying $15 million or even $10 million. And so from that vantage point, North Carolina is very well positioned. And the other component of this, and I kind of laid this out in the Rams Club story last week, is that North Carolina and the Rams Club have done a fantastic job of raising money over the years to fund scholarships. And there's about a $500 million in that scholarship endowment. And why that's important is when you talk about the increased costs with the increase in scholarships that are going to be part of this House settlement, North Carolina is well positioned on the scholarship front. And if you're able to cover scholarship money through a trust fund or endowment fund, that opens the door to be able to utilize your money elsewhere in better ways. And so I think North Carolina has done a very good job kind of setting things up for not just the revenue sports, but also its Olympic sports. So you can take some of the pressure off men's basketball and off football to cover the cost of your Olympic sports, scholarships and whatever else they may be in terms of the operational budgets. But you kind of set up those revenue sports to be able to benefit more from the money that they bring in. And so from that standpoint, Carolina is certainly well positioned within the ACC, and they're going to be competitive even in the SEC and Big Ten levels as well.
Within the ACC, that's why that media rights money is so important too, because we've talked about that in the past. Teams are spending all their media money on building facilities, doing all this, while all the donations go to securing talent and all, which sort of brings me to another question from one of our message board viewers, watchers, listeners, TKB 8866. How is rev share helping catch up with the SEC and the Big Ten? You sort of went there, and will not NIL just keep those teams ahead anyway, like you talked about earlier a little bit?
So the rev share having kind of a salary cap, that's the way people need to look at it. If you think about it from an NBA model, let's say, or an NFL model, you've got the salary cap in place for the teams in terms of what they can spend across the league. That's what rev shares kind of intended to do. You've got the $20.5 million. It's going to go up every year, a couple percentage points. So that levels the playing field from that standpoint. Now, where NIL comes in, if you look at the NBA and NFL, that's really your sponsorship deals. So while the LA Lakers can only pay LeBron James so much money in terms of his contract, his marketing deals and sponsorship deals, they have no control over that. And that's kind of how the NIL side of things is set up with the commercial NIL. Again, it goes back to how well can the NCAA and the court order that potentially will come into play on Monday can control the out of control spending on the NIL side of things. If it works and these are all legitimate deals, then North Carolina is going to be in good shape. If people are still, cheating around the edges and paying players the way they're not supposed to be paying players illegally, I don't know what else you can do other than try to bring light to the fact that other schools are cheating if you can prove it. But those are I think the hope is that with a U.S. District Court, Claudia Wilkins, with her might kind of behind the order, signing this deal and approving it on Monday if it goes through, that because there's some government involvement, that's going to help force some of these teams and the whole landscape of NIL to actually comply. Whereas the NCAA has no teeth, of course the federal government does. And so part of that is the hope that there can be some control.
Yeah, I mean, your last point is relevant because the NCAA can't seem to enforce anything these days. You mentioned in Coltrane 22 on the message board to ask about the salary cap. You mentioned that aspect of it. The rev share is sort of the salary cap, but the NIL is. So Michael Jordan made $3 million, if that, when he was a Bull back in the day, but he was making a lot more than that marketing and with, Jordans and all that stuff. So that is the salary cap people want. But to your point, and I'll let you correct me if I'm wrong, that's a quote unquote salary cap, but NIL still provides an opportunity for guys to make a lot more.
Correct. And let's use, Cooper Flag is what everybody's talked about. Let's use him as an example, right? Let's say, I don't know what his New Balance deal is worth, but let's say it's worth $3 million. So if you take that to a third party arbitrator and say, okay, is this fair market value? Is this legitimate? Well, that's a subjective answer, right? Because if Nike and Adidas are willing to pay him the exact same amount of money, who's to say that's not his fair market value? And so that's where a lot of the nuance comes in. You're going to have some players who have no name recognition. And you're going to have players like Cooper Flag who have all the name recognition. Well, who's going to get a bigger NIL deal? We know who, right? That's part of the equation. And so even though you have the rev share operating as a ceiling for kind of a salary cap, the teams that are able to bring in the bigger stars, therefore they're going to have more NIL viability in terms of the contracts they can sign. There's a lot of deals that can be made, and North Carolina has done this, where you have package deals that the university can provide, and student athletes can sign it for set amount of dollars, and in return, they go to autograph signings and they represent the school in this way or that, or represent these businesses that are tied into the school. Those are going to be part of all this with lower level athletes. I think it's the high end guys and girls that can demand money at a national level, like the Cooper Flags, maybe like the Caleb Wilsons, where you're going to see the big differences.
Yeah, I feel like it's still going to be the wild, wild west, but hopefully the clearinghouse will be key to reining it in a little bit. Like I said, a lot of questions from folks. We got a couple more on this topic. NC Buck said, how is it going to affect the portal? Hoopster, UNC Hoopster fan says, can you explain where UNC is as far as NIL, money-wise, compared to other blue bloods, and references other articles where Kentucky has a ton more money or Duke has a ton more money. Is that true? And I don't know if we can certainly verify that, but I'll let you try. And what are the things this university, this being University of North Carolina, working on to change the trajectory there?
All good questions. And I think that the main thing to know is that when you start hearing a lot of these numbers being tossed out, you have to understand that a lot of the people that are pushing those numbers out are agents, and they're trying to get these big numbers put out for their clients, for notoriety and for negotiation purposes. The idea, we know that Ohio State, which won the national championship in football this couple months ago, their AD last year said, "Hey, we spent about $20 million in NIL, and that's for a national championship team in the biggest sport that has 85 scholarship student athletes." The idea that a program like Duke is going to be spending $20 million, the same amount on a 13-man basketball roster, doesn't make sense to me, and I don't buy it. Now, I do think because of what transpired last year and because of how the NIL market has worked, you're still going to have to spend upwards of 8 figures, upwards of $10 million to really be among the elite. Now, is North Carolina there? We have reason to believe that they're getting close to there. But it's also a matter of, are you willing to play outside the rules? Are you willing to bend the rules to see if you can pay a little bit more than maybe what the rules suggest? And UNC has never kind of operated in that manner. They've always been very clear that they're going to operate on the straight and narrow. They're going to do things by the book. It's worked for them for a long time. And so while, yes, there are other programs that don't operate in that way, North Carolina is doing things that way. But North Carolina has a good stockpile for NIL. They have the access and the networking to be able to get a lot of those deals done. And so I think a lot of the concern about North Carolina's positioning with NIL has kind of been overblown. And I think part of that is because the team has not had the success in the portal, especially on the basketball side of things, that they would like. And when you've got Mac Brown coming out and saying that he only got $4 million last year, when we know the total was actually a little bit higher than that, it doesn't help the narrative. But I think North Carolina, while maybe they're not competing with the top handful of teams that are willing to bend the rules, they're certainly competitive at a national level.
Yeah, it's always the great question is it money? Is it coaching? Is it this or that? Why players come or don't come to a particular school? And it is definitely something to watch. Last question on this area, Greg, Real Hill 2. And I think this is a valid question for a couple of reasons, one of which I think is very important. I'll ask the question, are NIL agreements actual contracts, or do they differ, or are they limited somehow as to provisions? Can a player's compensation be limited by injury, leaving, quitting the team? Does it require the school to have a buyout? Are they required to do things outside of the sport or whatever? My question that I would add on it, and it's a very well thought out question and a very detailed question. If I sign an NIL contract and it's for 6 months, 12 months, 18, 2 years, am I free to go in the portal? How does that affect things? I'll let you answer it how you want. But I think when we've seen these multi-year NIL deals, how do they affect portal access and things like that? And it goes back to the NCAA or whoever enforces these deals. I'm interested in your take, Greg.
All right, so let's go back to the very beginning. And when NIL came in 2021, basically the NCAA was forced at the last minute to put this order in to allow for NIL. And the reason they did that is because there was a number of states that said, hey, if you don't sign it into legislation right now, we're going to go ahead and set it up within our own states. So therefore, you don't have any ruling in our state about whether or not kids can sign NIL deals. And so haphazardly, the NCAA said, all right, well, we're going to allow it on July 1st. And there was only 3 rules. And those rules were the deal cannot be pay for play. You cannot have improper inducements tied to choosing a particular school. So you can't pay a kid to come play for your school. And then compensation cannot be for athletic participation. So basically, if you sign a kid to an NIL deal, it can't be based on performance. Those are the 3 rules in place years ago. And so what we heard really the first year, 2 years, is that there's a lot of these handshake agreements. Leonard Hamilton's having to deal with that at Florida State right now, where kids claim they were not paid and there's not contracts to kind of prove it. But you had these free agency type dealings without contracts, which, as you can imagine, was chaotic and was a mess and problematic. Things have progressed since then. And each year, the NCAA has implemented some rules. Now that the schools can actually get involved, there's a lot more contracts in place. There are buyouts in place. There are stipulations like North Carolina, for example, some of the NIL deals that they've done, especially we know this from the baseball side of things, you have to maintain academic standing, right? You have to do these community events, all these different things. And so the way that the contracts are worked, yes, you can enter the portal. Yes, there are clauses in place to protect schools. We're going to see more of that in the years to come. It is much better off right now than it was 4 years ago, and they will continue to get better. But still, you can't dock a kid for performance. Like if you sign a kid to $1 million deal through NIL, and he comes in and he rides the pine, you have no repercussions. Now, the next contract, you can sign him to a deal for a lot less, but you can't say, well, because you stunk, you're going to have to pay us back some of that money. That's not how this works.
Yeah, it's an interesting aspect of it because we've seen, you mentioned, promises. Rashada, I think the Florida kid, the quarterback, they were going to pay him however many dollars and it didn't work out. That's the biggest one I can think of. We're talking with Greg Barnes here on The Next Level, answering some of your viewer questions, your Inside Carolina Tar Pit Premium and UNC Basketball Premium message boards. If you're not a member of those premium boards and you're watching this show, get on there. Your question might win you some Johnny T-shirt swag. And speaking of Johnny T-shirt, sponsors of the show, great friends of Inside Carolina, and they've got everything you could possibly want at their store or online. So check out johnnytshirt.com. Greg, let's move on a little bit. But one of the big topics is Carolina and the ACC or the SEC or the Big Ten or whatever. Tar Heel Blue 82 asks, when is Carolina leaving the ACC? And there's a lot of questions here related to that. Hillman 99, SEC or Big Ten. Jeremy Luke Rose, 2030, the latest Carolina would exit. Joseph Freeman, can Carolina get funds to leave the ACC by 2028? You and I did this show a couple weeks ago. We talked about it. I felt like it makes no sense not to just go ahead and get out, pay the 165 and bolt, because you'll make it up. By the time you get to 2030, you've made that up already. But your take on all these questions, I think it is a very, very valid point. We're talking about NIL. We're talking about money. We're talking about media rights. Here we are. I'll let you just run with it.
Yeah, and so for people wondering, with the grant of rights kind of falling through the cracks, as it were, with the exit fee and all those things that kind of came out with the ACC settlement a few weeks ago. As Tommy mentioned, the exit fee starting in 25-26 after that academic year is 165. And that number will decrease by 18 million each year until the 2030-31 season. And then from 2031 through the end of the grant of rights in 2036, the exit fee will be 75 million. So really, when you start looking at the potential media rights deals, the expectation is that by the end of the decade, the SEC and the Big Ten will be paying out $35 to $45 million more per school each year. And when you're talking about an $18 million reduction, obviously you do the math, you could potentially come out ahead if you go ahead and jump ship. Certainly North Carolina, Lee Roberts has got a business background. He understands it. There's a lot of people tied in with North Carolina, kind of the powers that be, that have incredible business acumen. And so no doubt these conversations are taking place as to when is the best time for North Carolina to leave. I don't know the answer to that, but certainly you can make the case that sooner is the better. You just have to make sure you have all your boxes checked, and that includes where you're going to go, how are you going to accumulate the funds to pay off that exit fee. Can you get help from maybe the conferences that you may go to, maybe your media partner? How does the board of governors come into play? With regard to the rest of the ACC, specifically NC State. All these things are important questions that have to be answered. And if you get all the right questions answered quickly, well, then maybe you can jump ship very soon. But if there's a process involved and it takes time to raise the capital that you need to be able to afford the exit fee and those types of things, maybe it takes a little bit longer. But I think that the key thing for people to understand is that with the ACC settlement playing out the way it has, it's not really a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And North Carolina knows that no longer will they have to wait to 2036. If they are ready to move to another conference, they just have to say, when does that make sense for us in the coming years? And I don't think whether it's 27, 28, 29, I don't think it's really that big of a deal, because you can plan ahead and make sure that the timing is just right for all these needs that you may have.
So let me ask you the question: where do you think Carolina goes, or where would you want Carolina to go? Is that putting you on the spot?
No, where would I want North Carolina to go? The SEC.
Yeah.
I think culturally that makes the most sense. There's a good argument to be made that the Big Ten, because all those schools are AAU schools, that is a better academic fit for North Carolina. But I think athletically, there's no question it should be the SEC.
Yeah, I agree. I'm interested if folks are watching this, chime in on the message boards and put your thoughts on that. Where do you think Carolina will go, and where would you want Carolina to go?
And one part of that I think is important too, Tommy, is the Big Ten offers a lot more sports, when you get into the Olympic sports, than the SEC does. And that worries some people, which I understand. But you also have to understand that even though the SEC only offers 21 sports, only supports 21 sports, that doesn't mean you have to kill those sports that don't transfer over if you were to go to the SEC. For example, Florida has a women's lacrosse team, and the SEC does not support women's lacrosse. So where does the Florida women's lacrosse team play? In the Big 12. And so there are ways around some of these questions to make sure that all of your Olympic sports are supported.
Yeah, there's always a way. And I often say, when people ask for tickets to events, I'm like, you can always get a ticket. If you can finagle it, you can get a ticket to anything, whether it's sold out or not. College sports are the same way. These sports will be viable. It just may not be in the traditional way of playing in the ACC or whatever. But I'm 100% go south. Let's go to the Grove in October and see Ole Miss and North Carolina play. Talking with Greg Barnes again on Next Level. More questions, Greg. Let's jump into the football thing here. We are in the middle of spring practice, and Bill Belichick's staff is working this spring practice more like a fall camp that I've seen, and it's a lot tougher, a lot more difficult. What have you seen as the range of reactions? Scamp74 on the chat or in the message board says range of reactions to the football overhaul. I think you can separate it, right? It's what happens on the field versus what has happened so far as that overhaul. But your take, and what have you heard about, from people of how folks are feeling about this, really a complete overhaul of the football program?
Yeah, I think where people are right now versus maybe where they were in early December has changed quite a bit. I think there was a lot of concern initially while the talks were taking place, and shortly thereafter, that there was concern that North Carolina had overcommitted itself, that it was a little bit reckless, that there was no way that this would work out. And then, of course, there was a lot of people who said, you know what, if we're going to take this seriously, let's swing for the fences. And clearly that's what North Carolina did. Now, as things have kind of settled in, I think people have come around by and large to the idea that, hey, North Carolina has committed an incredible amount of resources you can't argue with the PR that the program has gotten. I mean, North Carolina football has been talked about more in the last 4 months than probably in the last 20 years nationally. And all those are good things. And I think there's optimism that, regardless of how long Bill Belichick hangs around, that the football program needed a massive shakeup. And that has happened. And that is happening. And it will continue to happen for the next year or so as Belichick and Michael Lombardi try to get everything kind of settled in. But I think by and large, everybody is coming around to the fact that this is a bold move. Hopefully it'll play out. That's not a guarantee, but at least North Carolina is trying to make the right decisions and trying to improve the football program so that whenever it does decide to jump ship and go to the SEC or the Big Ten or wherever it may be, that it's better prepared and in position to compete at a higher level.
Yeah, we've talked about. I don't know how it's going to shake out on the field, but to Greg's point, the publicity and all. And another question was the difference in spring practice. I mean, SSP 123 asked the difference. You can see a difference. We've heard about a difference in spring practice. It is all football all the time for this group. They've said the 33rd NFL team or whatever they want to call it. Players are learning real quickly that it is a very different culture there. We'll see how it plays out. To Greg's point. Greg, how much of this unprecedented jumping in the deep end for football is going to affect basketball? I mean, we've seen Jim Tanner hired as a GM on the basketball side. I would argue a year, 2 years too late, or a little late. But your take on how the two major programs have affected each other over the last 6 months or so?
I think Bill Belichick coming in is nothing but a positive for the basketball program, for a couple of reasons. One, football is king in college athletics right now. No doubt about it. And you need to make sure that you're positioned well with football because football revenue drives the show. And it's, I don't know exactly what the total is, but I think football brings in more, like double the revenue that the basketball does. So it's significant even at a school like North Carolina. But more than that, Bill Belichick is trying to modernize the football program. The basketball program for a number of years has desperately needed to be modernized. And North Carolina was in a situation where you had Roy Williams, who was old school and really had no interest in modernizing. But he was such an incredible coach in a variety of areas that he could he can make up that gap, right, of being old school versus modernizing. He can make up that gap because he was so good at what he did. And as we are seeing now, unless you have a Hall of Fame quality coach in position, you can't really do that. And even towards the end of Roy's tenure, we were seeing significant cracks in his approach. So I think what the football move has said, look, we've got to modernize. We've got to be progressive. We've got to take that next step forward and really try to be a leader on this forefront. And therefore, basketball needs to come along for the ride. And so maybe this was the jolt that the basketball program needed to say, hey, we can't just rest on our history and our tradition. We actually have to do what it takes to be one of the best programs right now and not just rely on things that have happened in the past.
Yeah, I think that's a key point. You can't say, oh, well, look, they went to a Final Four 3 years ago or they did this last year. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's constantly moving forward. And if you don't move forward, you get left behind. We're seeing that. We'll see how it works out. A ton of questions. Greg and I have pulled 10 or 12 of them for this show, and Greg probably wants to go into a couple more, but I want to get him out of here. But I do want to ask a question. And this is a good one because this goes back to a quote that Mr. Greg Barnes himself had. You ready for this one, Greg?
Yep.
UNC secondary break quotes Mr. Barnes himself and says, does UNC still have a messaging problem? Personally, I think they're getting better. But, Greg, your take on all of this to wrap us up.
Yes, certainly getting better. I think part of the issue is, you mentioned it earlier, Bill Belichick. He has talked about North Carolina football being the 33rd NFL team. whether you want to laugh at that or not, the point is that he is trying to make it clear that, hey, my background is at the NFL. I was a Hall of Fame coach, probably the best coach that's ever coached at the NFL level. You come here, we are going to get you ready for that next level. And as everybody knows, it's all about talent. So either you evaluate properly and get under the radar guys, or you bring in the elite guys who are already thinking about the next level. That's what it takes. And then you have to coach them up and be good schematically. So the football side of things is kind of shifted in the right direction there. The issue on the basketball side of things, and as you said, there's been significant improvement. But 7 months ago at ACC Basketball Media Day, Hubert Davis is talking about we're not going to be a transactional program. You better be. Otherwise, you're not going to be competitive at a national level. If you're signing kids to contracts for NIL, you're a transactional program. Mm-hmm. Everybody is. And if you listen to Hubert Davis's comments over the last couple months, with the agreement, hey, we do need a general manager. Hey, the old way of Carolina basketball maybe is not the best method moving forward. And he's talked about being willing to pivot and change. All those things are very important. And so provided that holds, then North Carolina is going to be making the right moves forward. I think the frustration thing for fans is that at the end of the Roy Williams tenure, there was this massive need to modernize the program. And when Hubert Davis came in, it was really, okay, well, we're going to adopt some NBA schemes. And that was really it. Everything else was how things had always been. And that's not going to get the job done. Give Hubert credit for the 2022 Final Four run. Give Hubert credit for last year finishing first, winning Coach of the Year, all those things. That's all important. But North Carolina basketball has been set based on its floor. Dean Smith only won 2 national championships. But how many years in a row did he finish top 3 in the ACC? How many years in a row did he get to the Sweet 16? And that's really what has defined North Carolina basketball, is they are always in the mix. And that's the baseline. It's not a requirement of, hey, you've got to win X amount of national championships. That's too hard. It's very difficult to win a national championship. No. But what you can do is you can be very competitive and every year have the hope to get to that level. And so that's where the kind of the messaging comes in is, what are you wanting the program to be moving forward? Do you want it to be I don't know how many teams are in the NBA now, but do you want it to be the 33rd NFL team? Is that the goal, to bring in all these guys? Because the one part of it is, if you go back to 2020, Tommy, North Carolina had 15 guys in the NBA. That number's down to 6 now. The last time Carolina had a NBA All-Star, I believe, was maybe Rashid and Jameson, 17 years ago.
It's crazy.
It's been a while. And so you have to start to rebuild that base, and you do that by the way that you message your program. What do you want your program to be? If the message is, well, we're not going to be a transactional program, sorry, that's not going to work. And so I think Hubert has said a lot of the right things the last couple months. And now that you have Jim Tanner in place as GM, maybe that's going to be enough to kind of get the program back on the right footing moving forward. But we have to get away from the excuses. There's a lot of excuses of, oh, well, these other schools are just paying players left and right. Carolina's not going to do that. Therefore, that's why we've struggled. That doesn't fly. You have to find solutions, not make excuses, especially if you're a blue blood program that's one of the best programs that's ever been.
That's it. Messaging problem. Greg Barnes just answered it. Getting better, not there yet. Greg, we'll have a bonus question since you've got a little bit more time. And I think this is a relevant question as well. We've seen schools sell naming rights to arenas. The Yum Center, you've got NC State selling naming rights to certain things. Last question I've got for you. Heels Forever 567. And this is one of those questions I'm not smart enough to to even get into. So I'm going to read it, let you go. Will we begin to see private equity groups and corporations branded around campus and stadiums with the House ruling? I think for me, it's an easy way to make a lot of money. But for Carolina, as traditional as they are, I will believe it when I see it. When we have, the Jordan Arena or the Coca-Cola Kenan Stadium or things like that. But your take on that before we get out of here?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I would say that people need to understand that Lee Roberts is kind of changing the way that North Carolina athletics is approaching all of this and the university as a whole, because he does have that business acumen. That's very important. We'll have to see, when you start talking about private equity, what that looks like moving forward. Undoubtedly, there are conversations taking place. I do think you will see more sponsorships moving forward, more so than North Carolina has ever done. It's one of those things like what we talked about with the Smith Center potentially moving to North Campus, as we've reported. If we start talking about rev share, and we're talking about setting up and kind of recruiting for NIL deals, and we're talking about the media deals and the revenue gaps between conferences, it's all about money these days, more so than it's ever been. And so if you're not maximizing the brand that is North Carolina athletics, especially the men's basketball program, you're leaving a ton of money on the table and it's doing a disservice to the program. And I think that's one of the things where people talk about, oh, well, we've got to leave the Smith Center as is on campus where it's at. At what expense? You can't say that, hey, we need more money, and then you're not willing to do the things that raise more money. That's not how this stuff works. And so there has to be a understanding that this is a business now, more so than it has ever been. And so Lee Roberts, everything we've heard about him behind the scenes is that he is incredibly impressive. He is a forward thinker. He understands making up for some inefficiencies in how things have been run in terms of the business platform side of things. All that bodes well for the future. But there's the component of North Carolina was this great entity for so long, and the traditionalists kind of are stuck in the past. And I get it. I understand the nostalgia, right? All of us are North Carolina fans because our parents were fans and so on and so forth. But in order for North Carolina to maintain that level of an elite program, especially on the basketball side of things, and as a university as a whole, and with regard to athletics, you've got to be able to pivot. You've got to be able to make the money that's necessary to keep Carolina athletics there. And so because of that, yes, you're going to see more sponsorships. You're going to see creative ways of raising money to be able to spend the way that needs to be spent. And I think that's one of the interesting things when you start talking about the Rams Club and the way that they've set up these excellent funds and the Excellence Endowment. You're really talking about raising enough money to support a lot of these programs in perpetuity, so that you can actually use your resources and allocate them in different ways, so that it's not just about, hey, we're raising money for scholarships, we're raising money for salaries. It's that, hey, these endowments are in place and we've already covered scholarships. We've already covered coaching salaries. We've already covered operational costs for the Olympic sports. Now we can start raising money for all this other stuff that we need. And I think changing the mindset there is very important.
Indeed, it is. That is Greg Barnes. Shout out to Greg. Shout out to all of the submitted questions. We'll get together after this and decide who gets some Johnny T-shirt swag for the best question. And also, we're probably going to do this again next week. So if you have any more questions, get them in on the message boards. Send them to me on Twitter or on email, through email or message board DMs. But Greg, it's always a pleasure to talk this stuff. A wide range of topics here, and always something to talk about. It doesn't matter whether it's in season or not in season. There is no off season. Thanks, Greg.
Yep. Thanks, Tommy.